Hello, really well beings. Dr. Bhatia here with a short video, hopefully, about being wrong, otherwise known as a guide to making better mistakes. And as an admission, I feel like I'm an expert at making mistakes now, having made many mistakes in my time and dedicated quite a lot of time to learning from them. And if there was one take-home message I'm going to give you from this little talk, it's to ask yourself, could I be wrong, with a smile? So, I'm going to begin with a question. What does it feel like when you're wrong? Can you think of a time when you were wrong? Now, most people answer with, it felt bad, it felt awful, it felt terrible. And I used to feel like that. And then I realised I was wrong about that too. I hope it's all right to share a little story with you. I was travelling to Wales with my family to visit a friend who was building an eco cottage in the middle of nowhere. So we only had a sat-nav postcode to get us there. So in the morning, I was a bit hungry. I was a bit angry because the kids were fighting me, trying to get in the car. I was a little bit lost, not quite sure where we were heading, and a little bit tired. And despite all those things, we set off and dashed down the motorway, and we're travelling for quite a way before my wife mentioned to me, are you sure we're going in the right direction? And I just shrugged her off. I was a bit frustrated, so busy trying to get where we were going to go. I said, I think we're all right. But knowing myself that I'm profoundly dyslexic and I struggle with the multiple consonants that are the place names in Wales. And it was only once we decided to pull over and get some and top up our tanks that it really struck home to me that we were a good maybe 50 miles beyond where we should be. And at that point, I was feeling pretty rotten. I was feeling a bit afraid. What am I going to do with these kids? They're hungry and angry. A bit frustrated with myself, a bit like I was floundering. I wasn't quite sure where we're heading, and also a bit fatigued. But luckily, with a little bit of love and kindness from my tribe, we decided to stop, see this as an opportunity, have a picnic, reboot, learn from our mistakes and head on. And I count that as a blessing because that error taught me quite a lot. One, that I was wrong about being wrong. I had been wrong and completely unaware of it for a good 50 miles. And so being wrong feels perfectly normal. The other thing I realised is that realising I'm wrong is actually an opportunity to celebrate rather than feel bad, because I'm less wrong than I was for the previous 50 miles. And also it gave me something to learn about. So that taught me all about making mistakes. So with that in mind, I've developed a few strategies that help me make better mistakes in the future. Because I'm, as St. Augustine said, fallo ergo sum. I am mistaken. The first and the one take-home message I'd like you to take home is, if you've only got a fraction of a second to think about making better mistakes, simply asking yourself with a smile, could I be wrong? That does two things. One, it harnesses our innate bias to be something called loss aversion, the fact that we don't like making mistakes. So by asking that, we turn a problem, which is loss aversion, into an opportunity to actually harness our awareness. The other thing is it challenges something called our confirmation bias, which is our aversion to being wrong and actually a desire to try and be right and see things that match our expectation of how things should be. So I'm just going to ask you to say with me, could I be wrong, and have a smile on your face. Now, if you've got a bit more time on your hands, then you can ask some other questions too. So I teach student doctors in the medical school, and they have a strategy when they're formulating ideas. So when they gathered information from the people they care for and got some signs and symptoms, they put them together to try and come up with a diagnosis and a plan. And they ask 4 questions in that formulation process, or 3 normally, which versus, so what's happening? So what does it mean? Is there a diagnosis, or what does it mean for that person? And then what now? What do we do now about it? And by inserting this question here, what else? It actually makes sure they ask, could I be wrong, as part of the process? So I'm just going to go through it now. What, so what else, and what next? And what else is the same as asking, is there something else I need to think about? Are there differential diagnosis? Is there some other information that might be useful? Could I be wrong? With a smile. Now, sometimes we make big decisions, or we've got a little bit more time on our hands so we can look a little bit more deeply. And to help with those, I have developed this little phrase that really helps me make those important decisions. So, should I buy this house? Will I buy that car? Will I decide to refer this person for this procedure? And so I have this phrase in mind when I do that, and that is, pause it, audit it, and enjoy it. So pause, audit, and enjoy it. One more time. Oh, well, there's a smile on the end. Pause, audit, and enjoy it. And I'm just going to talk about the first bit first, which is I pause. Because I know if you have a space between stimulus and response, just that little bit of gap allows other possibilities. So we don't just follow our normal train of thinking. We can actually question and have new ways of looking at things. And it then means we don't continue rolling with a bias that might already be present. Also, by pausing, I get a chance to check in with my halt. And those are the 4 things that were actually happening to me when I punched in the wrong postcode in the sat nav. And that was, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lost? And am I tired? And if I'm doing any of those, I will park that decision until I'm not. And just to give you something about being tired, we actually have within us a predictable time when one will not be at our best. So we tend to peak in the morning and in the late afternoon, but we also have a dip in between. And during that trough, we have low energy and low insight. And for most people, it's around 3 p.m. And those we call the dough zones when I worked in anesthesia and in intensive care. Those were times when I definitely avoid making big decisions because I knew statistically I was 4 times more likely to kill someone. And so I'd make sure during those times I was super careful or checklisted what I was going to do. And that moves us on to the next part. So having checked that I'm in a good state and that the time is all right, having given myself a pause, so I then can allow myself to reframe the way I think things and not carry errors forwards. I then have this audit phrase, which stands for ask, unknowns, different opinions, inspect and imagine a genie and test it. So the first part, ask. I ask myself the question, could I be wrong? With a smile. And I also look out for my agendas and also for my assumptions. So I'm trying to find out, have I anchored where I'm starting from to a mistake and then carrying it forwards? And if I have an agenda, I'm already anchoring it to something I'd expect to happen. So I wanted to get to Wales in good time. So I was anchored onto something else. I was also anchored onto one mistake, which was when I was entering in the sat-nav postcode, I thought I'd done it the wrong thing. But that was the perfect time to pause. And assumptions, I carried on that assumption, even though it was questioned by my wife quite wisely as I was driving. The next thing is about unknowns. So actually asking myself, what do I know for sure? And what do I not know for sure? Where are my gaps in my knowledge? And can I fill in those gaps? Maybe look and research a little bit more if possible. And that brings me to the next part is, are there different opinions to what I've got? So when my wife says to me now, are you sure? I always pause, take a breath and check. And usually I tend to follow her advice because she's usually mentioning it for a reason. And similarly in medicine, we ask about differential diagnosis. So I look out for other opinions, or I ask myself, could there be another explanation? Which brings me to inspect. So if I've made a decision or a judgment, I'll then go backwards and just break it down to the component parts that led me to make that decision. As well as I harness our greatest inheritance, which is our imagination. And I imagine a genie, a really helpful genie who first of all gives me what I want. So I'm right the whole time. and I imagine being right, and then I check, is this what I really want? So if I'm right about this decision, then how does it feel? Is it actually what I really want? Because sometimes what I'm aiming for isn't what I really want. The other thing is, this genie is really good at doing something else. He can actually take away my first choice. So if I've made a diagnosis, for example, I'll harness that genie and say, okay, he's taken away that diagnosis. I can't have that anymore. Then what would be next? What would I thinking of next? So if there's a favourite car, I take away my favourite car and think, okay, if I couldn't have that choice, what would I look at next? And it then allows me to think about the other options. And then the next part is test it. So if there is an opportunity, I try and test and just check, do a little experiment, maybe think, okay, if that's the case, maybe I'll do a blood test just to confirm whether I think I'm right or wrong. And operating from the null hypothesis, the way the scientific method works is it assumes you're wrong and tries to find evidence to the contrary. So can I find evidence that shows that I'm wrong? Which brings me to the last part, which is enjoy it. And that's really important, that when you are taking a decision and making a stand on something, that you do so, one, with a light heart, so that you're doing the best you can. We can always get better with time, but that you're doing the best you can, so it doesn't incapacitate you from making decisions. And the other thing is, if you can enjoy it, know that you're doing the best you can, you'll be open to being wrong in the future and making better mistakes. So just to recap, that was my little summary about being wrong, which is a basic guide to making better mistakes. And if you could choose one thing from this list, and you've only got a fraction of a second, simply giving yourself a smile and asking yourself, could I be wrong, would be a great place to start. I hope you find that useful. I'd love to hear what you make of it. So do leave any feedback you can for me. And have a wonderful life. Bye for now.